Is it time to admit that our society isn't capable of responsible gun ownership? Hello, good people. It is Todd Shannon, data scientist, social commentator, getter of buckets. And today we're going to talk about what is admittedly my favorite cast of sports talk show hosts, right? The cast of First Things First, Nick Wright, Kevin Wiles, Chris Broussard. I watch this show basically every day. It's the only show that I can honestly say that I probably watch every day. I just like their commentary. And I love their commentary when they're talking about sports. And I have come to learn over the years that when they are not talking about sports, I do not love their commentary so much. Now, it's almost like it seems like there's some sort of prerequisite that if you're going to talk about social issues on any of these mainstream outfits, that you have to be left-leaning. And they are no exception, unfortunately. Even Chris Broussard, who is a Christian and who I respect a lot, he actually stood up against the LGBTQ mob many years ago, if you remember, and they tried to come after him when he was at ESPN. He didn't bow down. Much respect to Chris Broussard for that. However, we're going to see. I think that these guys are a bit misguided. So let's first of all set the stage. If you didn't know what happened, there was a Super Bowl celebration for the Kansas City Chiefs, and at that celebration, there was a effectively mass shooting, right? There were upwards of 20 people who were injured. At least one, maybe even two people, I think, actually lost their lives. And the cast of First Things First was actually at that Super Bowl celebration. Nick Wright is a huge Kansas City Chiefs fan, and he's a native of Kansas City, so naturally he would be there. So they were sharing their thoughts on in the aftermath of those events. And so let's start with some comments from Chris Broussard, because I thought we could learn a couple things from his commentary. Let's listen.
Of championship celebrations, the Texas Rangers, when they won the World Series in 2022, the Nuggets, of course, when they won it in 2022, Cleveland in 2016, Toronto, which of course is not America but Canada, the Dodgers, the Bucks when they won it recently. So this is happening far too often, and it was actually CNN was reporting our 48th mass shooting, which is 4 victims or more who were shot in this calendar year.
All right, so let's just first of all take in what Chris Broussard is saying. He's saying that apparently shootings during championship, Super Bowl, or championship celebrations in these major cities for all major sports, apparently shootings are fairly commonplace, which I did not know. But then there's a subtle shift in the kind of the tenor of the conversation when he says, "Oh, according to CNN, there's been more than one mass shooting a day in this country," and I'm like, that doesn't sound right. First mistake, Mr. Broussard, getting your information from CNN. Okay, I know that you're left leaning, but CNN is basically, I'm sorry to say, they are fake news. But in any case, more than one mass shooting a day since the start of 2024, and he said that was down. Like, let me just tell you, as a data scientist, whenever you just think about this, whenever sometimes you hear some of these statistics and it sounds fishy, don't ignore that, right? Trust your gut. And notice how they define mass shootings. Oh, and anytime 4 or more people were shot at once. That's kind of a strange way to define it, because honestly, that could include basically your standard run-of-the-mill drive-by shooting in your local hood, Compton, Chicago, wherever. Pick your major liberal blue city, and you can have, quote, mass shootings. But that isn't what we think about when we think about mass shootings. We generally think about indiscriminate shootings, generally ideological in nature, something like what happened at the private Christian school in Tennessee, something like what happened in my hometown several years ago at a shopping mall, at a Von Maur department store, or you can think of obviously Columbine is the first one, right? So when we think about mass shootings, that's what we're thinking about. We're not thinking about conflicts that erupt into shootings where 4 or more people are shot, right? And oftentimes in those situations, there's even multiple gunmen, right? So let's just think about a kind of a counterexample. which I think is actually more fruitful when we think about this topic. And these are some data from a website called Statista. And I will fully admit that I have not completely vetted these data, but this is more in line with what we understand to be mass shootings. And as you can tell, as you can see the upward trend, this goes from starting from 1982 up until 2023, and you can see the numbers here at the top here. They're saying there were 5 in 1999, none in the early 2000s. There were 7 in 2012. So you see the general trend here. There's an upward trend, and the first thing that I want to point out is that mass shootings, as is defined by this, which is more in line with what we think about when we think about mass shootings, is a modern phenomenon. This is the first thing we need to understand. Mass shootings are a modern phenomenon, and we're going to talk about maybe why that is. But the point that I wanted to make with Chris Broussard's comments is that this is a bit of sleight of hand, and I'm not saying that Chris Broussard did it on purpose, but this is a sleight of hand because whenever people on the left want to have the good old quintessential gun control conversation, they try to implement things and try to define the terms of the conversation such that it bodes in their favor. But this is deceitful because what he's talking about is mostly about handguns. Most of it, the vast majority of it is inner city violence that erupts into, 4 or more people being shot. And the gun control conversation, oftentimes what they try to say is that, this is about these, weapons of war, these, what do they call it? Assault style weapons, right? They wanted to ban your AR-15 or whatever, your high capacity firearms. But that's not what those data that Chris Broussard that he quoted, that's not primarily the situation when it talks about those types of shootings. And ironically, even the shooting that was in Kansas City as of late wasn't even the situation. There was no AR-15, there was no high capacity magazine firearm being used, or none of that. So I just wanted to point out this is a little sleight of hand here that I think we should be aware of. But now we're going to turn our attention to Nick Wright, because Nick Wright, he can't contain himself, right? Nick Wright was a huge vaccine mandate pusher. He was, he was just he was even on the, horse paste garbage when it came to ivermectin. He's just like, we got people out here wanting to take horse paste. Nick Wright, besides his terrible take that LeBron James is the best basketball player to ever live, that one, even though it's dumb, it's pretty benign. Nick Wright is actually not benign when it comes to his, I have to say it, his ill-informed and terrible political takes. So let's have a look at Nick Wright, because Nick Wright goes off the deep end and he doesn't even realize how silly and wrong he is.
I'm furious because this is so clearly all our fault.
He's going to tell you how it's our fault, unfortunately.
And we have so clearly lost the plot so quickly. I understand now that at this point, talking about any type of regulations whatsoever on guns in America is verboten for some. But some of the strictest statewide gun regulations ever passed in this country were passed by Ronald Reagan.
Right.
And
also, Nick Wright, some of the strictest gun laws in the country are in the places where the gun violence are the most prominent. So, Chicago is an obvious example. St. Louis is an obvious example. Any blue city that you go to where they have strict gun laws, they often have the worst gun violence. So, don't tell me about the strictest gun laws. This is not a point that matters.
The assault weapons ban in the 90s was supported by Ronald Reagan.
And it was rolled back, and good for that.
Who is a paragon, for...
This is another thing that people like to do. This is the fallacy of the argument from authority. Like, important person that everybody respects says this. Nobody cares. That's not an argument. You have to make a principled argument for why you should have something in place or not. And you can't say, well, I think we should do this because so-and-so said so. That's not an argument. I'm sorry. Ronald Reagan is not God. Okay. Ronald Reagan didn't do everything right. So let's just put that out there.
On the conservative side of the aisle, we say when it comes to this particular topic, we turn ourselves into morons.
I agree with that.
We say ludicrous things like, why have laws? People break them. Like, we make these arguments of, well, if you pass a law, only criminals will break the law. As if, okay, well, then make selling meth legal because only meth dealers will break it.
Okay, I got to bring you in close because that was by far the dumbest thing. That was the most. This is why I say, Nick Wright, just talk about the sports, man. Talk about the sports. So he says, well, why have meth laws if people are just going to break them? No Second Amendment advocate has ever said we shouldn't have gun laws because people will break them. Okay, that's that. I mean, I'm embarrassed that I'm having to explain this. The argument is that the Second Amendment is a constitutional and human right. And when you implement draconian laws that will infringe on those human rights, the only people who will be impacted are the people who actually obey the laws. That's the argument. So there's two things. So unless he wants to make the case that the meth dealer has a constitutional and human right to sell poison to his neighbors and to his community, then maybe he'd have a point. But unfortunately, he doesn't have a point because the Second Amendment is a constitutional right. And the reason why it's a constitutional right is because it's an outflow of the fact that we have a human right, a basic God-given right. And this is something that the left hates to grapple with because they don't even understand where rights come from in the first place. They think that the government grants you rights. And the Constitution, it was one of the first documents in human history to recognize that that's not true. The government doesn't grant your rights. The government recognizes and upholds them. So our rights come from God. And this is why the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. When they implement these laws, the only people who will obey them are the people who already obey the law, i.e., the people who are not the problem. That's the argument, Nicholas, right? Let's let him drone on because maybe he might have said something else that might be worth addressing.
We trick ourselves into good guy with a gun. There were 800 good guys there yesterday. How many of them did we shake hands with before that we saw? There were uniformed police. You couldn't have had more good guys.
Nick Wright, this is so beneath you. Nick Wright, do you understand that the good guy with a gun is not synonymous or not equal to a police officer? Do you know they could be, I don't know, average everyday citizens with guns that could stop these situations, which is exactly what often happens in these scenarios. As a matter of fact, just recently there was a shooting at Lakewood Church in Houston, Joel Osteen's church. You might have known about that. Someone came in with an AR-15, if I'm not mistaken, and they were shot, promptly taken down by two off-duty police officers. Now, these two people were off-duty, but they were armed anyway. Another same thing happened at another Texas shooting that happened at a church. Some deranged person came in, started shooting, and one of the parishioners took them out quick, fast, in a hurry. This has happened many times. And not to mention the fact that when you talk about home invasions and personal protection, there are a lot of ways where good guys with a gun are the only solution, and that doesn't necessarily mean law enforcement. So this is a silly argument. I'm not going to deal with the drivel of Nick Wright. There again, he should stick to his, doing Nick's Tears and, Mahomes Mountain, which he's good at. I love those segments. He should leave these conversations to people who have informed takes on the issue. But I'll circle back to my opening statement, which is it time to admit that our society is not ready for or can't handle the responsibility of responsible gun ownership. And this is the thing that I think gets always missing. And I think it's also missing on the right, because I think we have to come to we have to understand that it's a real possibility that the answer to that question is no. Because as John Adams said in the beginning, our government was made for a moral and religious people, and it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And what that means is, as our society becomes less devoted to God and less committed to the principles of God, then what we're going to see is that the abuses of the freedoms that we have need to be curtailed with certain concessions. That is, if we can't corral it. In other words, there is a trade-off to freedom that I think we have to acknowledge, which is that there is a prerequisite that the people be self-governing. And what we are getting from the left, more specifically, is we're getting from them they are constantly eroding the foundations of our moral fabric. They're constantly eroding the people's commitment to God, people's belief in God, the even concept of traditional Christian values. They scoff at, they hate, they actively oppose. And then when we see the downstream effects of basically scoffing at God's word, where people are deranged, the family structure is in disarray, people are lonely and desperate and destitute, and so they start shooting people indiscriminately. They don't grow up with the empathy for humanity. They don't grow up with that stuff, because you learn that stuff in church, and you might say that you don't, but even people who have lived in this society who aren't particularly religious, they are the benefactor, kind of like secondhand smoke. They are the benefactor of living in a society where even if they don't personally hold those views are widely held. And so you can't escape the culture that you're in, even if you don't subscribe to all the specific ideas that are in that culture. So the bottom line is that the real answer, I wonder if the people on the left would actually take a moment to say, instead of having a national campaign of how we can restrict gun ownership even more so that we can deal with the nut jobs and stop them from getting guns, even though they're going to do it anyway, and the only people who are going to obey the law are the people who already obey the law, right? So it's not actually going to have an effect on the people that you're trying to target. But what if we did this? What if we had a national campaign where we said, let's have return to church. You know how we had the National Day of Prayer, and that used to mean something? What if that at the federal level, at the state level, we said, let's everyone return to our faith and our values that our country was founded on. Let's everyone go back to church. Hey, let's have a specific week. Instead of having LGBTQ debauchery month, why don't we have a month where we devote to traditional family values and marriage and counseling people against divorce, how to be better parents, how fathers can be better spiritual leaders. What if we did that? Right? Because I can tell you right now, if we did that, we would reverse this trend that we see here, this modern phenomena of upward ticks in mass shootings, indiscriminate mass shootings, and also however you want to define a mass shooting, whether that's, your run-of-the-mill gang violence where somebody's spinning the block, shooting up their ops, or if it's this more traditional sense of what we call a mass shooting, I guarantee you that trend will go down. But will we do that? Is that what we want to do? Or do we just want to tell people we want to govern people like slaves and animals? So those are my thoughts, friends. I obviously have a lot of thoughts. I have a friend of mine that says, you need to get your videos under 10 minutes. I can't do it. I have too much to say. But let me know in the comments. What are your thoughts? What do you think about this situation in Kansas City? Do you think any specific gun laws would have actually prevented, two people who are in a dispute with handguns shooting people indiscriminately? Are there any gun laws that would have prevented that? Or do you think it's more of a social problem? Let me know in the comments. Till next time, friends, God bless you.